Thank you. And a reminder, the beer garden is up and going until 8:30 with some live music, entertainment, vegan Caesars. So head up there and enjoy that after the panel. Our panelists may be up there as well. And we'll bring them back. If you missed some of the talks earlier, this is going to be a great chance to kind of recap some of those moments and also ask those questions that maybe have come up for you throughout the day. So first, we will bring back our speaker from 1 o'clock, Camille Lapchuk, who spoke about ethics and animal rights. At 1:45, we heard from Dr. Pamela Ferguson about health and wellness. Did you change? Yeah, you changed, okay. At 2:45, we had Dominic Thompson talking about fitness and masculinity with veganism. At 3:30, we welcome Lauren Ornelas, talking about food justice. And not long ago, we had YouTuber Mexi joining us on the stage. So everything is a go today. All questions welcome. Of course, be respectful to our panelists, to each other here in this environment. And to make things run a little bit smoother, because we're operating on one microphone, we'll ask that you line up here in the center aisle. Just introduce yourself, who your question is for, and then I'll run back and forth with the mic. Who wants to kick it off? Who's got a burning question?
I just wanted to ask Pamela. Yes, hi. I just wanted to ask you, how do I find a nutritionist who is vegan and somebody who, like a doctor, who is also into veganism? Because I'm looking for someone like that, and I've been really having a tough time finding anybody for support.
Well, thank you for that question. And yes, it is very important to find healthcare practitioners who are knowledgeable about veganism and are supportive, and even a bigger bonus if they themselves are vegan. In terms of dietitians, if you would look on my Instagram account, I have a highlight saved with, I believe, all of the vegan dietitians in private practice in Canada. So you can look there and find who might be a good fit for you. A lot of us are practicing online, and so you don't necessarily have to work only with someone who is in your local area. So for example, my practice is almost completely online, and I see clients from across the country, but there are a number of other dietitians as well. So we do specialize somewhat differently, and it's always best to find the practitioner that is the best fit for you. Most dietitians offer a free 15-minute call, so I really recommend anyone who's considering a healthcare practitioner, take advantage of that call and find out, how that practitioner works and see, how they would work with you best. So absolutely, everyone should be thinking about seeing a dietitian. It's always useful to make sure you're optimizing your health, and if you're having any issues with your health, a dietitian can certainly help, a vegan dietitian in particular.
Thank you very much. Next up, questions for our panel. Okay, stew on it for a little bit. Maybe I'll hand the mic down the line and ask you guys your biggest takeaway for today. For those that have been coming to Vegfest that heard you speak or maybe missed that opportunity, what's something that we can do today or we can keep in mind or learn from your presentation that we can have carrying us forward?
Well, thank you. If you were at my presentation, you would have seen a very strong theme of that was that we can't expect legal change just to happen because we go to a protest once a year or even because we come to Vegfest once a year. We have to be active where the industries are lobbying in the interests of protecting their profits and harming animals. So we need to be in the corridors of power. That involves Parliament in Ottawa, that involves the legislature in Edmonton, that involves City Hall in Calgary. We need to be developing relationships with our legislators and showing them that animal issues are important and that they will lose votes. You will not vote for them. Other people in the community won't vote for them unless they start taking animal issues seriously. This finally happened for the first time in this past federal parliament in Ottawa, when we managed to get legislation passed just earlier this week on Monday, banning whales and dolphins in captivity in this country. So huge news. Yeah. And it only happened because citizens were active and made sure everyone knew that it would be very unpopular for them not to do that. So it was a funny story since we're here in Calgary. And there's a lot of conservatives in Calgary. The conservatives as a party weren't super keen on this bill because Marineland, Vancouver Aquarium had lobbied them, and they were like, we don't want the animal activists to have a win. But there's a procedure where if a bill is coming up for a vote, it can either be a voice vote where no one has to stand and be counted, it's just yays, nays, and the bill passes if the yays wins. Or a party could force it to go to a standing vote where everyone has to stand up and be counted. And the Conservatives didn't want it to go to a standing vote because a lot of their members didn't want to vote against this legislation. So they let it go by a voice vote because their members knew that their constituents wanted to see this pass. So it makes a difference.
So for those of you who were at my talk today, you'll probably remember that I said the biggest takeaway if you're looking to improve your health is to eat more fiber. Fiber is only found in plants, and so we will naturally be eating a plant-based and more whole food diet if you're focusing on increasing your fiber. And we find fiber in fruits and veggies, in beans and lentils, nuts and seeds, whole grains. So that's the new 4 food groups I want you to be thinking about when you're thinking of what to eat, and just focus on increasing your fiber. Only 5% of Canadians get enough fiber. We all hear, do you get enough protein? Where do you get your protein? We're all getting enough protein. Don't worry about protein. Worry about fiber. So, and if you have family members who are maybe concerned about their health, maybe facing some health issues, and they might be resistant to messages about going vegan, talk about fiber. Everybody loves to hear about fiber. Encourage them just to eat a more high fiber diet. That will guarantee, if they do that they'll be eating more plants, and it will be so good in terms of preventing heart disease, diabetes, and some cancers, which are Canada's biggest killers. So this is a way to show love to your family and to also show love to your own health and your own body.
How's everybody doing? Yeah? I mean, everybody's so relaxed out there and chill. I guess because I'm directly in the middle. I think one of the things I want to leave you all with, because my talk is a little bit all over the map, I talk about a lot. But I want you guys just to understand that, like the 2 ladies before me, especially what Camille was talking about, we have to get active. That means not being afraid. That means taking your profiles off of private, being public, hitting those hashtags, educating your online community specifically about everything you know. Because I'm sure there's a lot of you out here that can cook very, very well, and you can make some amazing dishes that are very aesthetic appealing. So imagine if you created something like lasagna per se. I make lasagna, but I'm gonna be honest, it looks like shit, right? It really does. But someone up here or in the audience can probably make an amazing dish, right? And take a nice photo, and their profile is public, and they use those vegan hashtags. You never know who you may have an impact on in your community or outside of your community looking at those hashtags. And it has nothing to do with your following account. If you could change one person and put that seed in their thoughts with respect to trying out plant-based food, just think of how many animals you are going to save if they do decide to go fully vegan. So please be mindful of that. Don't be afraid, because food, photos, foods, the way you walk, the way you talk, your body is a form of activism too. Not just standing out here with these signs and causing disruption. It's activism 360 in all different types of lifestyles, and you just have to find what you're the most strongest at and be assertive about it. Okay? All right.
Let's see, the takeaway from my talk, other than the US sucks, is that, sorry, in Canada I'm allowed to say that as much as I want.
We're going to stay up here, just so you know. Me and her, we're moving up here.
Yeah. Is for everybody to recognize the power that their food choices have locally and globally, and that we have a responsibility for many of us who are vegan because we care about non-human animals and not causing harm that we need to extend our circle of compassion to care about human animals as well. And that every time we eat, we have to look at what we eat as a responsibility, not only to our bodies, not only to the planet, but most importantly to the living beings. And so to really recognize that going vegan and helping the animals is fantastic, but we also have farm workers to think about who are responsible for feeding all of us. Unless you pick and eat everything that you grow, you have a farm worker to thank for everything that you eat, especially if you're a vegan, encouraging other people to go vegan, you're asking them to eat more plant-based foods that are being picked by farm workers as well. So please remember farm workers in your advocacy. Also remember that not everybody can go vegan if they don't have access to healthy foods, and to make sure that when you use language like something's cruelty-free, that you're talking about human and non-human animals alike. Thanks.
All right, so my talk, I focused the starting of my talk on environmental issues, so the environmental reasons to drop meat. It was a fairly depressing talk, if any of you were there, about the state of our planet, the state of our fisheries, the state of everything, basically. But a takeaway from that was that one of the best things you can do to cut your greenhouse gas emissions in half right now would be to go vegan. I then extended the talk and talked a bit about why we need to be doing more, and I kind of echo what some of the other speakers were saying about the need to get politically active, the need to critique the broader systems that we are working within. So as Lauren just mentioned, I talked a lot about how vegan items aren't necessarily cruelty-free, but if we want to create a cruelty-free, compassionate world, a sustainable world, we're going to have to take aim at this broader political economy that we're participating in, and really reclaim that economy so that it works for people, for the planet, for the animals, and not just the interests of big capital.
Would that stir up any questions for anybody, for any of our panelists? Yes. One back here. Maybe just introduce yourself, first name, and who your question's for.
Hi, my name's Ryan. My question, I guess, is for Lauren, Mexi, and sorry, I forgot your name. Pamela. So a lot of, especially the last two speakers, talked about capitalism, and capitalism compels people to engage in the market. Not just it is a choice, but you have to, because we don't have the skills to make our own clothes and to grow our own food and to make our own housing. So we have to participate in the market. But with tax havens, we don't have the ability to fund those kinds of things. So I want to hear a little bit about what you guys think of tax havens and shipping money offshore that could be used to fund the social welfare state, that could help to eliminate or at least make these problems a little bit easier to deal with.
Who would like to take that first? Camille?
I know pretty much nothing about tax havens. I did not take tax law in law school. And I'm probably not best placed to critique the capitalist structure. But if your question is about, maybe I can answer a different question, or maybe a related question is about how we take advantage of the existing system that we operate in right now and start shifting our economy toward one that's more plant-based. So if we look at the amount of subsidies given by federal governments, provincial governments to the agriculture industry, particularly to the animal agriculture industry, it's in the tunes of billions and billions of dollars a year. There's also a supply management system, which in and of itself is a subsidy on its own. It jacks up the prices of products like chicken and dairy and eggs so that consumers pay more and those industries end up making more. I think there's actually an interesting issue about supply management. It might actually be to some extent beneficial to animals compared to a free market system, because it does restrict perhaps the number of animals used in the system, but that's kind of an aside. But I think one thing we need to be doing is lobbying for an elimination of subsidies to animal agriculture industries, first of all. So taking away that extremely unfair market access advantage that they have. So they're producing products that are much cheaper to purchase than they would be in sort of an actual free market system where the market has to bear the cost of those things. So they're treating the environment as externalities. They're treating our healthcare system as a massive subsidy to their industry. They're feeding us products that cause diseases, cause cancers, cause diabetes. And we are all funding the cost of paying for the people who suffer from those diseases caused by those industries. So not only should we shut off the funding at the source for these industries and stop subsidizing them, but they need to be taxed as well. We need a meat tax in this country. And, I won't get into the climate implications of that as well, but there's been a lot of talk lately, especially in this province, about carbon taxes, and I think the time to start discussing a meat tax is now too.
I admit I don't know what tax havens are either. I'm glad it's just not because I'm from the US. My way of looking at all of this now is looking locally, and that means everything locally. So that includes our foods, what we support, and I don't mean like, oh, local farmers. I mean like politically locally. I mean like empowering people of color and black and brown communities, indigenous communities, because once we're in charge, things are going to look a lot different. And so I think that really supporting us is critical. And I don't mean that arrogantly. I just mean, frankly, we don't have the power, and watch out when we do. But I also want to echo what Camille was saying earlier, because I happened to hear a tiny bit of her talk, is that we have to get better local officials. And for me and for our organization, pretty much the federal government's worthless, as you all know, in the United States. And again, that's another topic. But we have so much power with our local policymakers that we never take that opportunity. Because I'm talking city council members, school boards, all of that is a tremendous amount of power we have in terms of how the children are taught, what they're being fed, what type of lies are they being told about history, whose history is being erased. We have the fact that our city council members have way more, what do y'all call them here again? Counselors. Give so much power here with them because they just want to be reelected. And you let them know, I strongly believe in targeting bad politicians. It's not so much getting good ones in because you don't know how they're going to really be, although Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is a good example of somebody who people worked from the grassroots level and got her elected. If you don't know, she's a phenomenal policymaker in New York. But we need to be working and thinking locally. And so I think that we got to look at our city council members, even our city, we call them state legislators, our state legislators. All of that has way more power than the federal government. So if we keep on looking to the federal government, at least in our country, I don't know if it's the same here, there's no point. But we got to start changing it from the ground up. We got to start targeting politicians who are not representing our values, and then I do mean protesting, and I do mean voting them out.
Thank you. So yeah, this is a really big question. I do want to echo what the two speakers before me have said. I also think that, because you're talking about funding and tax havens, and of course, yes, tax havens are a problem. I just also think that this whole rhetoric about, we don't have money, we can't pay for it, right, is also a bit false. I don't necessarily really want to get into like modern monetary theory because, it's a whole big thing, but arguably we do have the money, and then also you look at where we're spending money as well. Like the Pentagon basically is the world's largest polluter, and it is obviously destroying so many people and environments and animals around the world as well. And it's being funded by how many $1 billion? $700 billion. everything, right? So it's really not a matter of we don't have this money. We definitely do have the money, and I think we need to start fighting, imperialism abroad. We need to start fighting these broader systems that are directing this money away from where we need it to be. So.
Question?
I was just wondering, instead of fighting, do you have any ideas for more positive approaches, like educating and saying, like, instead of asking people to give up meat, you just say, let's make some better choices, or I don't know, any other ideas?
So more of a positive approach than the negative. Who would like? Dominic?
You know, it's different levels where when you first become vegan, it's like you get unplugged from the matrix, right? We all want to just flip over that truck and call everybody that doesn't eat meat everything in the book but the child of God. You know, we just want to really hurt them, you know what I mean? Because we feel like we've been lied to. But we have to take a moment and realize that most of us in this community, especially the older generation, not these amazing vegan babies out here and these vegan kids out here, we used to eat meat. We also used to be disconnected. So we have to show some empathy and understand that we too once was disconnected and not realize that it's not that that's a shitty person. We all probably have friends and family members that continue to eat meat and they're great people, but we haven't found a way to connect to them, or maybe someone else hasn't found a way to connect with them. I'm all about assertive activism, aggressive activism, calling people mothers and calling women any type of names or men any type of names. You see it a lot in the New York AR community when they, you know, attacking and cornering these women and calling them everything like fur whores and fur hags. And I don't think that's appropriate, especially if you're not going to call your own mother the same name, right? You know, you're not going to sit up at a dinner table and look your mother in the eye, your sister in the eye, because they're probably omnivores, and call them these names. That's not cool. So why the hell are you calling somebody else mother or someone's sister or someone's grandmother a name? So you can be active, you know, and you can certainly educate assertively, but just remember where you came from and have some dignity about it too, and have some respect, because that's another human being and a human animal itself, because humans biologically, we're animals too, okay? The world is complex, guys. It's a challenge out here. You don't know what these people are going through. Some people are barely living check to check. And the last thing on their mind is about going vegan. So just realize that, okay?
I think there was a question here.
Hi. I wanted to ask everybody's opinion because a long time ago I went to this presentation. It was called Leave a Legacy, and it was talking about how people can, like in their will, they can donate money towards different causes. And that made me start thinking that I would like to leave something to help the animals. And since then I've been trying really hard, and I know that there's lots of restrictions for against activism for charities and stuff like that. But if somebody wants to do that, what's the best way to do that?
I'll start on one side and work our way over.
I happen to deal with often a lot of people who want to leave a legacy when they pass away to help animals. So just on the note of restrictions, just so you understand sort of what can be done. And just, this is not formal legal advice. I'm not representing any of you, just have to say that. Go find a lawyer if you need to talk about this, but just some information. Charities can actually do a lot more than they were able to do in the past. The Canada Revenue Agency recently changed the rules. So previously, charities couldn't engage in very much political activity. It had to be less than 10% of their overall resources. And that was challenged in court. It ended up resulting in a rule change. So there isn't that same restriction. So you can donate to a charity now and still feel assured that if you are interested in political advocacy, that they can do some of that work. But there's also lots of nonprofits out there who don't have the same restrictions as charities do. Charities can issue tax receipts, and that there is some benefit to a person's estate to get a tax receipt, but nonprofits, there's no restrictions on the expenditure of the funds. So, I mean, the question of how best to support the legacy that you want to leave behind is kind of a personal question. It depends on what type of activism appeals to you. I can say the stuff that we do at Animal Justice is really focused on structural changes and making a difference using the law. So changing our political institutions from the inside out and making them more responsive. And I think that's an effective approach, but there's lots of other effective approaches too. There's lots of organizations who do pure vegan advocacy, who change hearts and minds. There's organizations who fight specifically for the end of agriculture subsidies. There's rescue organizations. So I guess the best advice is to look around and see what you like the best.
Did anyone else want to contribute? That we're good? Okay. Moving on, another question. All right. Run back here, just introduce yourself and who your question's for.
Hi, my name is Harpreet, and my question is for Lauren. So we live sort of in a remote area with long winters, and I've been trying my best to avoid berries from Driscoll's just in solidarity with the farm workers and how they're treated there. But I find it, so I've turned a lot to frozen berries, especially in the winter and stuff, and I find it really hard to trace back where they're from. So I get organic berries, and I find out that they're packaged in Toronto, but I can't find the source of where they come from. And I know that there are a lot of berries that are packaged that are from Driscoll Farms, but they're packaged under other names. So I'm just wondering for berries if you have any sort of specific advice on how to make sure that I'm not contributing to the suffering of farm workers.
Thanks. So first of all, I'm sorry that you live in an area that's so cold all the time. That sounds awful. I want to thank you for honoring the Driscoll boycott, because that's incredibly important. So for those of you who don't know, there's a campaign against Driscoll berries. There was a campaign called by farm workers in Washington State who were experiencing a lot of problems with the company, but they were able to sign a contract together. But there are farm workers in San Quintin, Mexico, who were inspired by what was happening with the Driscoll workers in Washington, and they're currently the ones asking for the boycott. And so as an organization, we only support those boycotts called by farm workers themselves. So in terms of berries, really it's just the Driscoll ones. So the frozen berries, which is always like my excuse, like if they aren't, but if Driscoll's is packaging under different names, I don't know what those various names are. I know non-vegan products that use Driscoll's, but I don't know the names of the frozen. What I would recommend is you can email us the name of that company and we can try and do some research and find out if they're sourcing from Driscoll's or not. But I don't know all the different names that Driscoll sells under, but you know, again, our goal is to honor the farm workers. So if you're buying another strawberry, again, organic is better because you're not adding agricultural chemicals to farm workers. But because there's no boycott against that berry company called by the farm workers, doesn't mean it's okay, but the farm workers aren't asking for the boycott, then I say you can only do what you can do on that end.
And I just wanted to add, this is actually the perfect time of year to be asking this question. If you have freezer space at home, you can start buying some berries and freezing them. And then you'll have berries throughout the winter. So buy some Okanagan berries and stick them in your freezer and you'll have them for your smoothies. That is a great point. Okay, next up, you have another question? Oh, it's better if we hear you on the mic. Maybe meet me halfway here, excuse me.
Thank you. I'm confused about coconut oil, coconut milk. Is it healthy, organic, sustainable? I'm lost.
I feel like that's Pamela. That's a great question. Actually, I will just be upfront that I don't know a lot about the sustainability of coconut milk and oil. If someone else on the panel wants to speak to that, then that's great. I can speak to the health impact. So coconut oil and coconut milk have more fat and more saturated fat than a lot of other products within the vegan realm. Usually vegan foods, whole foods, tend to be very low in saturated fats. So if you're trying to limit your saturated fat intake quite strongly, if that maybe you have a history of heart disease in your family or that kind of thing, then you might want to limit your coconut oil intake. However, it's important to remember that if you are eating a mostly whole food plant-based diet, your overall intake of saturated fat will be very low. So having a little bit in coconut milk or coconut oil is not likely problematic. As a dietitian, I recommend that we definitely need fat in our diet. Try to get more of your fat from whole foods, nuts and seeds, avocado, oils absolutely are useful in cooking, but taking a moderate approach to oils is usually the healthiest approach. And absolutely, you can include coconut oil especially if you're doing any really high temperature frying or something. Coconut oil works very well for that. It works well in baking, and that's because of that saturated fat content. So, unless it's very hot in your house, your coconut oil will be solid at room temperature. That shows you it's saturated. It will be more similar to other products like butter or, shortening that you might have used for baking in the past. So it has a lot of applications. I wouldn't stir it into your coffee as like a health aid, but I would say absolutely you can enjoy it in a curry or in your baking, no problem.
Maybe I'll just build on that. A lot of people have questions about oils and whether they're good or not, and the fight against margarine because it's full of unhealthy oils. What are the best ones that we should be looking for when we are doing our cooking and our baking?
So I would say the most important thing in terms of oils is just to keep your intake of oil low to moderate. And then when choosing an oil, looking for one, like I would say olive oil, avocado oil, grapeseed oil, those are some better choices, but more important than that is just to keep your oil intake low to moderate rather than there being one specific oil that is going to be magical that you can drink it or something. Don't do that. So yes, it's more important to just keep it moderate. And for some people, if you have a diagnosis, let's say of heart disease or diabetes, it might be wise to even completely eliminate oil from your diet, but still make sure that you continue to include nuts and seeds, avocado, some whole food sources of fat.
Next question? Is it a question? Okay.
I would like to say that most coconuts that are harvested in Southeast Asia are done with animal labor. Monkeys are used to harvest those coconuts. Yeah, okay.
Lauren?
From the research we have done, the coconuts that are being harvested by monkeys is not commercially sellable. It's not coming over here. So we've done some research on it. We're happy to send anybody the information, but we haven't done too in-depth because we're a small organization, but our preliminary research, when we heard people saying that, was when we checked into it, that's not where we're getting our coconut from.
Next up, question in the back. Just introduce yourself and who your question's for.
Hey, my name's Tana. This question's for anyone really that could answer this. I've got a lot of friends that are into climate change activism, and I've been trying to convince them that veganism is a key factor in transitioning and helping with climate change factors, but I guess I'm not really getting to them yet. So I was wondering from anyone from the panel here, what are some of your suggestions or key points that you guys lean towards to talking about climate change and veganism and how they intersect?
Who would like to talk about Mexi?
Yes, so climate change and animal agriculture really go hand in hand. So as I said, one of the best things that you can do individually to fight climate change would be to go vegan. Like that would cut your carbon emissions in half. A person eating meat emits 7 times more greenhouse gases than a person eating vegan. So it is really significant. A vegan diet also requires 1/18 the land space because you have to grow all these crops to feed to the animals instead of just eating those crops yourself, right? And so most of that land is being cleared in the Amazon rainforest. And I talked about this in my talk, but that's when you clear forests in that way, it's a double whammy for the climate. So because you're clearing a carbon sink, right? Our forests act as a carbon sink, so they absorb all of the CO2 that's in the atmosphere, and then they re-emit that as oxygen. So if you're cutting down that forest, then not only are you perhaps burning that forest and then all that carbon is being released into the air, but now you're filling that land with animals that are emitting methane, you're emitting CO2 in the process, you're emitting nitrous oxide, so you're emitting all of these greenhouse gases, and then you don't have that carbon sink anymore, so you don't have that forest there to absorb the CO2. and so that you can see that that's really like a double whammy for the planet. And so just all of the land space that we need for this omnivorous diet is just completely unsustainable. And you can even talk about the slaughterhouses themselves and the waste that they produce, right? The waste is also really damaging for our climate. So for environmental activists, it really, really makes sense to drop meat and animal products completely.
I just want to say that I worry sometimes about how vegans talk about this issue and how I don't think they do us a good service, or they don't do the animals a good service. I don't think it really helps anybody to say, how can you call yourself an environmentalist and still eat meat? I don't say how we can do any of that kind of stuff and talk that way, environmentalists, and think they're not going to put up a wall and start to ignore us. Because certainly they have every right to. And we do that time and time again with other social justice movements again, and I think that we just need to be very careful about how we talk about the environment in a way that we see them more as comrades in the struggle versus trying to show them we're better than they are. Yeah.
I just wanted to add that a lot of vegans are starting to go to climate marches and starting to attend environmental activism events with vegan signs in not a confrontational way, but a positive message saying, here, we're allies in the environmental struggle, and you might want to start thinking about dietary choices and how that impacts on the environment as well. And just, going back to the very first question and my point about what we should all be doing in political advocacy and activism, just so everyone knows, Tana, who asked the question, is a political candidate in this riding in Calgary Centre. So if you're looking to make a difference, volunteering for a vegan candidate who gets the issues and will raise those issues in the debate, you should check out his campaign. Tana Boomart, running for the Green Party in Calgary Centre.
I completely agree with everything that the panel has said, and if your friends would be interested in reading something, I would recommend that they have a look at the Eat Lancet Commission report that came out, I think it was last year. It doesn't actually recommend a completely vegan diet. However, what it recommends is a predominantly plant-based, almost completely plant-based diet. And what I hope would speak to them is the fact that this is not something that was connected to like a vegan organization. So if they're concerned that maybe propaganda is being put forward or they're being biased, this was 30 very leading scientists from research institutes all over the world. And they're really recommending, something like less than 5% of the diet contain animal products. So I know a lot of people really want to see everyone go vegan, and they're upset with any messaging that doesn't give that 100% number. But I think this messaging is very positive, it's very evidence-based, and if everyone on a population level, I think the number in Canada right now of people who identify as vegan is between 2 and 3%, but over half of Canadians are trying to reduce their meat intake. And on a population level, in terms of impact on the environment and impact on animals, reducing meat intake, if everyone is doing that, actually is going to make a bigger difference than 2% of people completely avoiding meat. So not that I'm saying don't go vegan, absolutely go vegan, but when advocating, I think that these messages around dramatic reducitarianism are also very positive.
You guys, it's already after 6. We have time for maybe one more question. Who has the best question in the house? Yeah? All right. Introduce yourself, who your question's for.
My name is Jess, and my question, I guess, is for anybody who can answer it. What do you think is, I guess, better or more has a better impact on like the environment and all of that is if
like there's obviously a lot of cultures in developing places and just like rural places that will eat meat or something like that, but it's like they're living off the land, or like indigenous people, living off the land, like hunting and all that kind of stuff. Like, do you think that, like, how do you feel about them going vegan? Like, do you think it's a different circumstance when you're talking about people in that situation versus like people who are obviously living in a city and just, like buying meat from a store?
I personally think that it is a very different situation. I mean, I'm not sure exactly which Indigenous group you're talking about, but I would say people who are living off the land, like people who have been living that way for quite a long time. I mean, I don't want to romanticize any Indigenous nation, but surely, many nations have been living sustainably off the land for a very long time. And I would say that our industrial food system, I think actually, as Lauren mentioned in her talk, that animal agriculture was brought over to North America through colonization. And so I think it is a very, very different thing. I mean, the way that we are living is obviously incredibly consumptive. It's incredibly unsustainable, and I mean, I would not feel comfortable trying to tell other people who are living another way to change what they're doing.
I don't want anybody harming any animals ever at all, but my biggest concern are the developed countries, the Western countries. That's who my issue is with. They're the ones who are doing the most harm and the most damage to human and non-human animals around the globe. So I'm always going to pick that fruit first that I think I can take down.
I echo what she says. It's just more problems out there, and there's bigger targets that we should focus our time and resources and energy on, trying to educate these groups than to attack the smaller guys or those cultures and those markets, and as well as those different countries that have a lot of other bigger problems going on. But yeah, let's focus on the bigger guys and the bigger fruit, as she said, and spend our time and energy there instead of being nitpicking at every little thing. Because we're not going to convince everybody to go vegan overnight, but let's go after the ones that are open-minded and the ones that have the biggest resources to help turn this big issue around. Okay.
I think when it comes to the Indigenous people of Canada, I think that we as Canadians have a long list of things to do before we even start thinking about veganism. I think let's think about healthcare, education, land and treaty rights. Let's think about apologizing for genocide and trying to make some kind of restitution. And I think that's where, in terms of working with Indigenous people, that's the work that needs to be done before we can even start engaging with people about conversation around ethics and diet. I feel like there's a long list of things to do first.
And I'll just add that I think white people in particular need to be mindful of replicating colonial structures in our activism and imposing values on others who don't necessarily share them. But that said, we also have to be careful not to let what I will describe as our enemies set up arbitrary divides that don't actually exist. So for instance, governments or industries often try to pit vegans and animal rights activists against Indigenous communities or other communities of color. And I don't think that the divide is actually, I don't think that our communities are actually that far apart. I think that Indigenous communities share a lot of values with vegans. There's a lot of mutual interest in decolonizing the food structure, and as it was pointed out, animal agriculture and the industrialized system was actually brought over to North America by white colonizers. There's lots of interesting research about how they actually used agricultural animals to steal land from Indigenous peoples and replicate what they had in Europe and actually take the land away from them. So I think there's a lot of shared ground and common conversation that is happening slowly, maybe not as slowly as it should, but
that when divides are set up, just be mindful that just be mindful of who's telling you that there's a divide there, because oftentimes it's not what it seems. The government often tries to pit those communities against each other.
And it's time to wrap things up. Round of applause for our panelists, our speakers at the 3rd Annual Vegfest. Camille, Pamela, Dominic, Lauren, and Mexi. Thank you so much for joining us. Can we find you in the beer gardens? Yeah, okay, there'll be a few in the beer gardens, going strong until 8:30 tonight with live music. The door prizes will be drawn on that stage around 7 o'clock. You don't have to be there. They'll be posting the winners on social media as well, and the ways to claim your prize if you aren't lucky enough. And speaking of those prizes, if you haven't already,
head on over to one of the 2 entrances located down